So this second Sunday of Easter is called Divine Mercy Sunday, and that comes from a devotion that Sister Faustina, now Saint Faustina, had revealed to her. And the Divine Mercy really is about the heart of Christ. And so I just want to focus in on today's gospel in three areas. The first one is the fear, the second one is the forgiveness, and the last one is the peace. So first, the fear. And we have to recognize that this gospel begins in fear. The disciples locked themselves in the room for fear of the authorities. Now, they had good reason to fear. They had just watched Jesus arrested, put on trial, crucified, and killed, and buried. So they had good cause to be afraid because they knew what happened to Jesus could happen to them. And so they're still on that first day of the resurrection. They've locked themselves in the upper room, the room where they just had celebrated the Passover with Jesus. And they've heard from Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was at the tomb, and she saw Jesus. And so she went to the apostles, and she told them, "I've seen him, he's alive." And of course, their fear prevented them from believing her. And so then they see Jesus for themselves. Now, first we have to talk about what fear does, because fear is one of those human experiences that causes us either to fight or to run away. And we see that again when Jesus was arrested. Peter thought at first he could fight his way through it. And so he pulls a sword and he cuts off the slave's ear. And it doesn't work, so then he runs away. And of course, Peter wasn't alone. Everybody ran away. And so they're gathered together and they're looking at each other, trying to figure out what happened. How did we get here? And it's in the midst of that fear that Jesus appears. And he offers them peace. Not just any peace, not the peace that we understand, but shalom, a peace where everything is made right. Now, if you want a different way to approach it, peace is not the absence of violence. Peace is that sense where everything is complete. Everything is back together again. In fact, the roots for the word shalom could be interpreted to say pay complete. Like when you go to a restaurant and you get your receipt after paying the bill. Except the receipt that Jesus shows is his hands and his side so that the apostles know that payment has been made. The peace is what he wants to give to them. But first, there has to be the work of forgiveness. They have to forgive themselves. The only way they can do that is by encountering the Lord who they betrayed, encountering each other who had failed, and encountering in themselves that place in need of forgiveness. So I want to walk you through that again. I want you to think about your worst mistake. We're not going to ask for responses from the congregation. So I want you to think about your biggest failure, your worst mistake, the thing that you are most embarrassed about, and how the fear that comes from that can cause us to either want to lash out, to fight, or to run away. Both are reactions to fear. And it's that fear that closes us down. It's that fear that shuts us off. It's why I really believe that fear is the opposite of love, not hatred. Hatred's a whole different bag of things, but fear is so opposite of love because it turns us inward and away from others. It causes us to be afraid of taking risks. It causes us to be unwilling to reach out. And so when we feel that fear, that desire to protect ourselves, we know that something is not right. And that's why we need to encounter the forgiveness of Jesus Christ. We need to see in his hands and his side, not torture, but love. We need to see the love that goes beyond fear. That's why in the Gospels, Jesus is constantly saying, do not be afraid. Choose love instead of fear. Because love actually can heal what is in need of forgiveness. Love can actually change our world. And because of that, we encounter the risen Lord in that place of fear. And so if you bring your most embarrassing or your worst mistake to the Lord, ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? What do I seek from the Lord? Because the Lord stands in our midst and he shows us his hands and his sides and he speaks peace and then he breathes. His breath is powerful. We call that the breath of God. In fact, it has a name. It's a really cool name because it's kind of onomatopoeia. It sounds like what it is. The word for God's breath is ruah. It's that sound of God breathing life back into us. He did it in the beginning in the book of Genesis. That's how he brought life to us as men and women. But on this day, the first day of the week, he brings life to us again. So we have to remember the timeline. Today is not the Sabbath. Today is the first day of the week. It's the day of resurrection. It's why we gather together and celebrate Mass today instead of yesterday, because today is the day of new creation. It's on this day in the beginning that God looked at this formless waste, this chaos, and he brought this chaos into order by breathing over it, by giving his Spirit to it and giving life to it. And God does that for us. And so on this Divine Mercy Sunday, we come because we know we need to draw close to the mercy of God, a mercy that is willing to go to any length to help us to experience that forgiveness we desperately need, to help us to see that our worst mistake, our most embarrassing moment, is not what defines us. What defines us is when God's creative Spirit enters into our life and says, "Let there be light."